Welcome back to another very exciting episode of Trying to Figure It Out. For the people who are new here on Trying to Figure It Out, we do literally exactly that. We try to figure things out from life to family dynamics, mental health struggles, relationships, friendships, pretty much everything under the sun we talk about on this podcast. And this week with me, we have Craig Sheffer, who to me is known as Uncle Keith from One Tree Hill, but he's so much more than that. He's such an amazing person, an amazing actor. He's super successful, and I'm very excited to start figuring some things out with Craig. So welcome, Craig.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
For people who did not watch One Tree Hill, Craig played a character named Keith Scott. He was Uncle Keith. He was on the show as a main character through season 3. One Tree Hill is a show that I actually watched for the first time in college. I did not grow up watching it. I was more of a Gossip Girl, 90210 girl.
Is it very different than 90210, which I've never seen?
Yeah. I would say the difference is 90210 and Gossip Girl are the kinds of shows that cover these big cities that have a lot of people with privilege, a lot of, bigger storylines of, people who are living in Beverly Hills and going to these rich schools and going to beach clubs on the weekends and having their silly dramas and their breakups and their girl fights and all of those kinds of things. Whereas One Tree Hill is so many different things. It focuses on music. It focuses on a small town and just life and things that I feel like reach a larger audience of relatability. I think when you watch One Tree Hill, you're really watching something that people not just in Beverly Hills or New York City go through. We're talking like all of America.
Like where I grew up, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in blue-collar America, which is pretty much 85% of
100%.
the people in the country, really, right?
Exactly.
So.
I think One Tree Hill is just so niche and just touches on subjects that weren't touched on, especially in that time.
Yeah.
One Tree Hill averaged 3.5 million viewers in its first season, which is really crazy, especially at that time. So what was it like for you being part of such a successful show?
I don't think I knew how successful it was. I had never done television before. I started in early 80s in New York City, doing theater and all that, and then did movies, 80 movies, whatever. Mm-hmm. And this show came along, and I really liked the character and the cast. So, I jumped on board, and everybody was kind of saying, don't expect much. I'm like, I'm fine, however it works out, And then, we did 2-3 shows. They were like, this might only last the pilot, might only last 2-3. And then, 4 or 5 shows into it, suddenly, I walk into a mall with my daughter and I'm being chased by like 20 teenage girls down the hall. Like, Uncle Keith, Uncle Keith. I was like, wow, that happened fast, So I'd never been on a TV show before. And my first one was like suddenly this little hit of a show, and it wasn't on a network, so it wasn't like being on 90210 or Friends or something like that. It was a smaller world of fans, but they were people who really, really loved the show and became obsessed with the characters.
Yeah. I know you didn't really watch the show, but do you have a favorite episode that you can remember?
Well, I watched the first show, and I would see bits and pieces of it. My, daughter would watch it, so we'd watch little bits and pieces, and of course, I did watch the show where I got shot because that was so sort of insane. And
so insane.
Later on, I got to see it more, actually, after I left the show. Because my daughter was in watching it. She had the discs and all that stuff, and her friends would come over and want to see it and want me to, be there. So I would, I got to see a little more, and I think it really has a lot of heart. It's heart, but it's also just really it's an intense little show, and
it's really intense.
I think a big part of the success is the way they chose the music and blended the music in, because it just takes what's happening and just blends it seamlessly with the emotions that they're trying to evoke and
couldn't agree
and
more.
Make evolve, and it's really well done.
Yeah,
that's one thing the guy who made the show
for sure
did really well, and he was a musician too, Mark Schwahn.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard a lot about him.
Yeah, definitely heard about him. I have a playlist that I listen to in my car, and it's a lot of songs from One Tree Hill, and my boyfriend will be like, this is such a One Tree Hill song. I know that's where you found this song. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
I like the music from that show. It was really
good.
Just so well done. Gavin Graw was launched by that
show made
song.
His career.
Yeah, it made his career.
It's
what a nice
crazy.
guy, too. He came down and actually played at our cast party, and we had some things in common. My father was a prison guard, so it was his. Really? He actually says that in the song.
Really?
So we had kind of blue-collar similar roots.
Amazing.
And the other people that came down, really nice people. Tyler Hilton and I think Michelle Branch.
Do you have a cast member that you enjoyed working with the most, or that you still have a close relationship with now?
Well, I see everybody. We do these conventions. We all went to Paris
for One Tree Hill.
Last year at this time, we were in Paris doing a convention.
Wow, you guys go to Paris for these conventions?
Yeah, they've done them all over the world, I think. They're putting another one together in London. There's another one in Charleston. And then we do like one a year in Wilmington.
Yeah.
In the town where they have the locations. So fans get to go see Karen's Coffee Shop and the high school. And matter of fact, we've been, the last time we did it was in, I think, November, and we stationed the whole thing at Trix this time. I thought it was the best because before that they were doing it at a convention center. It was more spread out.
Right.
This one, everybody was more concentrated, and
more intimate.
Got more interaction with the fans as opposed to being taken to a green room or away from everybody and then go out and do the pictures. We were kind of all. I thought it was the most sort of intimate setting they had done yet, and
that's amazing.
I hope they do the next one like that
So is Trix a real place?
I think they made it a real place back then for a little bit, but now they're literally turning it into a nightclub. I don't know who bought it and is doing it, making it the actual Trix nightclub.
So crazy.
But when we did the convention, they were serving drinks to everybody. And
the brain blaster.
Yeah.
Going into season 3, the director, Mark Schwahn, who we talked about a little bit, gave you some mixed messages about your role on the show going forward and whether or not you'd be continuing on the show. Can you give me a little more context as to what was going on at that time and what you were being told and what you really knew going into shooting season 3?
I didn't know much. I know that I was, paid for every show. So the last 6 shows of the season, they decided to have, I think, me and Chad go away.
Yeah, you guys left out of town for that was when you had the Jules, the fiance.
So Mark told me, and he said, yes, we're not going to be here for the last 6 shows. You and Chad, we're going to send you guys off, but, we're going to do a special year next year. And I was like, am I coming back next year? And he's like, oh, yeah, of course. The next year, suddenly I was like, I never got a call until I found out. Paul was like, yeah, we're going back. I was like, I didn't hear anything. They didn't call my agents or man. And then he calls me 3 days after Paul told me, everybody's going back. He was like, yeah, so good news and bad news. Got a great season for you, but you're going to get killed off. And, they have the right to do that, I guess. We signed a 7-year contract, and they can basically kill your character off at any time. So that's the way
when that
our
happens,
industry works.
How does that work? If you sign a contract and then they kill off your character, the contract just ends?
Yeah.
Nothing, just done?
Pretty much, yeah.
When you got that call, did he brief you or prep you for how you were going to be killed off? Did you have any idea going into the season what was coming ahead? Because it feels to me like that's a pretty, you have to prepare yourself emotionally for that kind of content and that kind of way of being killed off.
I was surprised. He told me the basic idea of how it was going to go down, and I was thinking, wow, I don't know if you really want to mess with killings in schools. This was not that long after Columbine. It was only
this
10,
was
10
also
years
the
after
first time
less than 10 years after
that
Columbine.
A show really touched on this nationally for young viewers.
Yeah.
So it was really impactful. I was curious to ask you how the cast reacted and if they had people on site to help you guys, like counselors, and how were you guys prepped for that?
Yeah, I don't think, there was none of that. No, especially back now they might do that. Everything's changed a little bit. People are more aware of people's mental health and handling the situation. I was worried more about the audience.
Right.
I didn't want a copycat situation. I had already been part of one 10 years before that. That was people died because of what I did in a movie. And that was a movie called The Program. It was a football movie.
Oh, wow.
James Caan, Halle Berry. I was the main guy, the quarterback. My character lays down on the street, and cars drive either way at night.
Right.
And I was like, this is very irresponsible. I don't think this is a good thing. First of all, it's not cool. If you're going to make the character look cool and dangerous, have him, dive off a railroad bridge into water. Or anyway, I didn't really want to do it, and they pretty much, forced me to do it. And 2 kids from my home state, opening weekend, did that stunt and got killed. So they pulled the film from the theater It was number one at the box office the first week, or I don't know if it was the first or second week, but it was number one at the box office. They pulled it for 3 weeks and then put it back out. But it was, so I was already part of that. And that was, my thinking was like, are you sure you want to put this on a sort of teen show with all those impressionable people out there? But it seemed to do the opposite. It seemed to be there seemed to be a healing element to it for the viewership. And I think something that allowed people to understand a little of the thinking of somebody who is a mental and social outcast,
100%.
Mentally not totally there. And then with bullying and all the other stuff that goes on, you can see how, that could springboard into a violent act.
It was definitely hard to watch, and still to this day, it's amazing that was put out when it was put out, and thank God it had the impact that it did.
Yeah, and how now it's every other week, right?
It's
crazy.
Yeah, already in 2023, there's been 74 people killed or injured in school shootings, which
just in schools. Wow.
Just in schools. That number is obviously way larger if we're not talking schools, but just the fact that that's in schools, a place that you would imagine to be safe, is a crazy number. What role do you think that this One Tree Hill episode can have when we talk about gun violence and school shootings today?
Well, I think there's several elements, and one is what your show sort of talks about all the time, which is mental health.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be able to, parents have to be responsible enough to know where their kids are mentally.
Yeah.
They need to be checking in with their kids, and guns are a part of it. I don't think there's any reason that people, unless they have some serious mental checks, need to have AR-15s and automatic weapons. We didn't have those for a long time, and so that's a big problem, because you can take out too many people at once before anybody can even get involved. That's a problem.
It's a huge
But
problem.
more than that, I think it's just parents at home, knowing where your kids are at, and if you do have guns, keep them in a safe. But also the bullying. I don't get it. There's so many things going on where people are coming out and saying they're being bullied in school, but the school doesn't do anything about it. There's no discipline also anymore. We kind of let everything go. So many of these cases, the person's been bullied interminably, and they sometimes turn a gun on their classmates, and sometimes they turn it on themselves. But it's happening a lot. I don't know. Mental health, and parents got to be more aware of where their kids are at.
Yeah. We think we've made progress, but there's just so much more progress to be made in terms of recognizing mental health, the resources for mental health. Just having a guidance counselor in school isn't enough. Having one counselor, there's still a lot of people who don't believe in that. So if you have the guidance counselor to check a box, that doesn't mean people are going to utilize that resource. There has to be ways to encourage people and feel safe to utilize that resource as well. And there's just, I could talk about that.
They also have to build a system of some sort, because these kids that are being bullied heavily are going to their counselors.
Right.
The principals are informed.
Right.
But there's nothing being done. What do you do to the people who are doing the bullying?
Yep.
It's almost like there's a lack of a systemic way to respond to the bullying, which it seems like almost every single one of these kids that picks up the gun is, an outcast and is bullied.
Absolutely.
Almost every single one.
Absolutely.
So,
or just openly struggling and no one's doing anything to help them. It's very devastating, honestly. I want to talk a little bit about Mark Schwahn, because I have personally heard a lot about him and read a lot about him. And you've said before that he had a really non-collaborative control over the cast members and over the show. And you kind of touched on this, but I'm curious what he was like as a director and what the dynamic was with you and him and the other cast members as well.
He was so about control to the point of where, in the beginning, I was kind of being me. I was wearing what I wear. I was wearing my Timberlands, pants tucked in, bandana, had a little bit of facial hair, and it was one by one he kept taking things away. And then it would be
strange.
If you don't take off the bandana for that scene, they're going to fire you. It was just about very, very controlling, and as a guy who'd been doing it for 20 years already at that point, it was a little demeaning.
100%.
It's not first TV show. You asked me to come do it. I'm doing it. Now you're going to start micromanaging all my clothing and whether I tuck my pants and my boots, which plenty of people do in Middle America. And
Right.
now I got to have my bandana off. Now I've got to shave down. No scruff at all.
And why?
Yeah, I was
literally
like,
why?
just felt like it was about control. That's what it seemed like to me.
Kind of raises the question for me of like, if that was happening to you as a grown man on the show, like I can only imagine what it was like for Sophia Bush and Hillary and Bethany, like all these people who were really young when the show started and they're women, and like what was he controlling them with, and how did they navigate that?
I was hearing stuff about him sort of having little attractions with the cast and making some inappropriate comments about having kissed some people and that kind of stuff. I started hearing, I guess by the third season, I started hearing a little more about, you know, especially the control with the kids and how it was just like he was doing the same thing to them, just kind of like, just do it. Not like no question, collaboration. And
you know, watching the show, you would never think that anyone was unhappy being on that show. When you watch it, you just feel like everyone is just a happy family and like the cast members all love each other. So it's sad to hear and crazy to hear. I guess it's just something you learn when you live in LA. What you see is so different than what's really going on behind the scenes. And I've had my fair share of those experiences as well. So it's just interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is this intimidation factor by producers, directors, men in charge mostly.
Power dynamics.
I felt it from some other members of that production team, just in terms of the control and just kind of a bullying aspect.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about all my One Tree Hill gossip and giving me all this information that is really interesting to hear as a person who loves the show. I now want to just talk about you and your life now and your family and just who is Craig Sheffer? Not Uncle Keith, not Keith Scott, none of that. Just who are you? So you've continued acting in films and television shows since One Tree Hill. What does life look like for you now? What's a day in your life and what's a year in your life?
That's a good question. My life's pretty simple. I like to write. I'm developing scripts. I write poetry. I'm working on a novel that I've been working on for like 15 years.
That's amazing.
Keep it simple. I like to ride my motorcycle, hang out with my daughter, spend time with, her. I was back for a long time after One Tree Hill. I was pretty much checked out of the business. My mom had dementia, and my brother, he was bedridden from a bunch of heart attacks. So I went back and took care of them for like 6 years. I came back 2 weeks before the pandemic, so everything pretty much shut down for a year and a half. And so and the business has changed dramatically now with all it's like all streaming. Mm-hmm. And that literally was in that small chunk of time I was gone where everything turned around. So, I'm developed my own things, and it's nice to try to keep on growing,
Yeah.
And there's so much room for that, My daughter helps me with that a lot. It's amazing. She's very deep and powerful and smart, and that's like her whole inner world is awesome. And like we can talk about this stuff forever and keep each other working on things. And
so you have one daughter.
Yeah.
And she's 29, you said?
29, yeah.
Okay. And does she live in Los Angeles as well?
She does, yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your guys' relationship and what it was like having to travel a lot with a young daughter, and what is your family dynamic like? Yeah,
well, I was with her mother for a long time. Her mother was Gabrielle Anwar, who's an actress from Son of a Woman. She tangos with Pacino in Son of the Woman and all that. So we were together on and off for a bunch of years, and then she had Willow, and we were together for a couple of years and then broke up. Then she met another guy, and they ended up having 2 babies, and I was their kid's godfather. And we all did all holidays together and traveled around and would go to sets. Her and I did like 5 or 6 movies together when we weren't together to keep the blended kind of families going. Yeah. And that was an interesting way for my daughter to grow up. And she's 10 years older than the other kids.
Yeah.
So like when I went to do One Tree Hill, she was in about 4th grade at that time. Her mother had just had her first kid with the other guy. So it was like, why don't I just take Willow and bring a teacher along and try to catch her up? She didn't like going to school, wasn't into it at all. So that's what I did for the One Tree Hill period.
Yeah, I always say this, like, I'm grateful that my parents made the choice that they made to separate. I don't think anyone would rather choose the path of watching two people unhappy together. I don't think that that's a enjoyable way to grow up, or to watch two people claim that that's what love is. I don't think that's a good way to learn what love is or what relationships are supposed to be like. So I'm sure
it makes it hard either way, actually. I mean, because I look at my parents, they were together all their lives, and they fought terribly like cats and dogs. But the interesting thing about them is there was a unconditional love beneath all that that I could always see in them. I don't know what's harder, if it's harder when they split up or it's harder when they don't, but I knew that I was also loved unconditionally despite all the character issues and...
Yeah, I think that's all that matters, as long as you can show your child that they are loved. And
yeah, because none of us are perfect. Pretty much everybody does the best they can with what they have at any particular time. So you can't condemn people too much or hold too much resentment because, including me, can't hold too much against ourselves either because we do the best we can at times. And when my family died and I left there, I had 2 years of grieving. There's nothing I could do. 2 years of depression and grieving, and there's nothing I could do to get out of it. I had to let the grieving process take place and let the time pass and just say, this is where I'm at, man, and I can't sledgehammer myself in the head and beat myself out of it.
Yeah, I'm like coming out of a bit of a depressive state and 2-year period of going through a lot of trauma and experiencing depression for the first time in my life. And the whole time I really made a point to just accept where I was in that time. I always say this when I'm asked what's my best advice to someone who's struggling, is just not to be hard on yourself. I think that's brilliant. I could never not say, there's no better advice I have to give. I think that we all try so hard to be like, just be happy or just feel better, or just go do this and you'll feel better. We're always looking for that one piece of happiness, and sometimes you just have to let something run its course. And I think like if that's 2 years of depression or 5 years, like we don't pick what's given to us. And if we're not hard on ourselves for allowing ourselves to go through that, like that's the only way out, in my opinion. Because the times where I tried to pressure myself to snap out of it, I was 10 steps backwards. I always say, I think every day gets a little better, but I think the days where I'm like, I can't get out of bed today and I don't want to. And instead of being hard on myself for that, I'm just like, I'm going to stay in bed and watch One Tree Hill today. Yeah. And that's going to be my day. And I'm not going to judge myself.
That took me to like late 50s, when I went through the grieving process with my family, because I had depression on and off, anxiety more than anything, PTSD.
Yeah.
And just was always hard on myself because I am the caretaker and things like that. And when those things take you down and you're that guy, and then you have extended periods of time like I had in my 50s.
Yeah.
I couldn't see myself as a strong person anymore, and it really just tore my heart out. I didn't even feel like I could be the strong father that I've always been. I could see that she saw my weakness and my emotion, and it was it's difficult. So you do got to let yourself have those periods of time and keep reminding yourself that, you're okay.
Yeah. As hard as it was for your daughter to see you like that, I'm sure she'll always look back and be grateful that she was able to see you as a human, not as a superhero who doesn't get affected by real life, because we all do. And I think the people who try to act like everything's fine and then they shut down behind closed doors are actually portraying a way worse example than someone who can show what they're really feeling. So
yeah, and at least talk about it with the people that are worthy of that trust.
100%. That's very true. So I gave my advice that I would give to someone when they're in their lowest point or their hardest point. What would you say that yours would be?
I think you pretty much just said it, which is you got to try to accept where you're at, but also remind yourself that there's a strength within you to be able to move through it and try to trust your roadmap, your heart.
Well, thank you so much for everything. I've had the best time talking to you. I do something in every episode. As I told you, I love music, and I love to incorporate music into my podcast because it does hold such a special place in my heart. So I do a segment called Alpie's 3, where I pick 3 songs each episode that kind of pertain to the theme of whatever we talked about. And I usually have my guests contribute whatever songs come to their mind. So in the vein of One Tree Hill being one of the most special music shows to have ever existed, I was thinking together we could come up with 3 songs that we think are One Tree Hill songs or songs that remind us of the show to put on the playlist that I have from each episode. I obviously think we should do I Don't Want to Be. I don't want to be anything other than... I think that should obviously be on the playlist because it's the iconic theme song.
So they have to have been on the show? Or
No,
they just
it can be a song that like gives One Tree Hill vibes.
I think the underwater scene where I saved James, it should have been Breathe. You know that song?
Yeah.
From that era?
Yeah. I like that, but I will say Boston, when they're driving in the like wedding getaway car and they're leaving their wedding, Boston by, I believe it's Augustana, that song is just iconic. Do you have any other ones you want to throw in?
Hallelujah. Leonard Cohen.
That's a beautiful song.
Yeah.
Beautiful song. So that was a very special episode for me. I had the best time talking with you. You are incredible. It's really cool for me to learn who you are as a person separate from a show that I feel like I know you from watching. And it's also cool to see how true to that character you really are. It seems like that was just simple acting for you because it was so in line with who you are and your personality traits. So thank you for sharing so much with me and talking about your family dynamics and telling me more about all my little One Tree Hill fandom questions. Thank you for coming on Trying to Figure It Out.
Thank you for having me.
You're amazing.
I hope
Thank
we
you
figured
so
something
much.
out today.
I think we're on our way.
We know that we don't know anything.
We know that we can't
get
ever
any better than
figure
that,
it out. Well, thank you. I look forward to talking to you guys next week. Thank you all for listening, and that's a wrap.
See you guys. Thanks for having me.